Friday and the first one of the year. My name is Alicia Crank. I'm the Executive Director of Seattle City Club. I will talk more to you in just a little bit, but first I want to bring up Anne Murray, who is the Director of State Government Affairs for our host here today, Bristol-Myers Squibb.
Good morning. Good morning and Happy New Year. Welcome to Bristol-Myers Squibb. Again, Anne Murray with Bristol State Government Affairs Department, and we are thrilled to be partnering with the Collective and the Seattle City Club to provide the meeting space for today's event. And to all, particularly Speaker Jenkins and leaders Braun, Wilcox, and Denger, welcome to our Seattle Research and Early Development site for engineered cell-based therapies aimed at harnessing the power of a patient's immune cells to enhance or restore their body's ability to fight cancer. So the second through the 12th floor is our Seattle-based research facility. And with expertise in research, development, operations, and manufacturing at our state-of-the-art cell therapy manufacturing plant just up the road in Bothell, we are really proud to be bringing the power of precision medicine to life by creating therapies from an individual patient's own cells. And for your information, we employ more than 1,400 Washingtonians in the area, and in research, discovery, development, manufacture, and commercialization. So that's just a bit about us. We certainly appreciate your sharing with us your priorities for the 2023 legislative session, and we look forward to working with you and your colleagues in support of the innovation of the vibrant life sciences industry that we have here in Seattle and in the state as a whole as well. So thank you, and welcome to Bristol-Myers Squibb. Thanks. Alicia?
Thank you, Anne. As many times as I've been in this building at the Collective, I always wondered what was upstairs. So thank you. And as someone who's a two-time cancer survivor, I appreciate the work that your organization is doing. Okay, now I get to schmooze a little bit. Thank you so much for being here. Many of you have come to our legislative previews in the past. This is the first one that we've had in person since 2020, so it was super exciting to be able to plan it for today. But obviously we know in the current climate how important it is to create accessibility for these kind of programs and events. So being able to bring this to you in a hybrid setting now and going forward will be a priority of our organization. If you're new to City Club, we are ones that champion civil discourse and civic conversations. It's something that's lacking in this current climate, and we really want to continue to be the model of an organization that champions civil discourse and sharing of ideas and thoughts and perceptions. Our program strengths come from civic health of our region, and we want to thank all of you for being here, including our panel today. And I know that you've done a few of these this week, so thank you for still showing up fresh and excited to be able to do this with us. We will have a Q&A session during this, so you will see some index cards on your table if you're here with us in person. So if you want to start jotting down questions that you might want to ask later on, we'll have a microphone towards the back. And for our online audience, our staff is monitoring the chat there as well, and they will make sure that any questions that you put there will be asked here as well. So we are making sure that you are connected with us, even if you are at home or at your desk somewhere else. I want to extend our heartfelt thanks to our sponsors who help us bring this together, the Boeing Company and Davis Wright Tremaine. Thank you so much. I definitely want to thank my City Club staff, our board, and our program committee for helping develop the questions that we have today that you will hear from our moderators. And to Bermudez Media for filming and live streaming this event for us. Thank you so much. So now let's get to business. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderators for today's discussion, KUOW's Angela King and King 5's Drew Mikkelsen.
Good morning.
Good morning. Alicia, thank you so much. Such a joy to be here and see everyone, from here down as well. It's been a rough few years, but we've survived, we've pulled through, and it's so nice to congregate and share in this moment. And it's good for me to be here along with my old former colleague, Drew Mikkelsen. We go back to, 1900 and something at the UW.
Yeah.
So good to see you as well. But it is not about us. It is about you. It is about answering the questions that you have as we approach the beginning of the new legislative session. Our representatives are here to answer your questions, so thank you all for your presence here. And as you heard, we will have a Q&A session toward the end of the program, and we are also asking the online audience to submit their questions. We'll tend to those toward the end of the program, but for now, I'm going to hand it back over to Drew.
Very good. So the legislative session starts at noon on Monday. It'll be the first time everyone's back together in person since 2020. Obviously, we know there will be lots of debate, emotional hearings, controversial proposals as well, and a new 2-year budget. That's a big deal coming up. These four are going to be playing a huge role in what happens down at the Capitol this year. Joining us on our panel today, we'll start on the far right. Senator John Braun, he's the Senate Republican leader representing the 20th Legislative District, Lewis County. Next to him, we have Senate Deputy Majority Leader representing Washington's 45th District. That's Senator Moncadingra. Thank you for joining us. Redmond as well, is right? Correct. Next to her, we have House Republican Leader representing Washington's 2nd Legislative District, Representative J.T. Wilcox, the Yelm area, Pierce County, some of Thurston County as well, correct? Very good. And from Pierce County, we have the Speaker of the House, the 27th District, Representative Lori Jenkins. Thank you all for joining us this morning, bright and early. We're going to open, yes.
That may be the only applause we get, so we'll take it.
Well,
In the media, we're not supposed to applaud for anybody, so if you need to applaud, you tell us, but don't expect us to lead that, right? So we're going to open up with a question that I think will just be the start of a few questions here. But the first one we want to ask you is to tell us what 2 pieces of legislation should pass this session, and then one idea or bill that shouldn't see the light of day. Speaker Jenkins, we will start with you on that.
Well, it's a little bit early to make those predictions because we're just in pre-filing, so we haven't even seen all the legislation that'll be filed. So I'll probably answer a little bit, some specific, but more generically. I think in terms of what I want to see is a 2-year budget. The budget, that's the thing we're constitutionally mandated to do, the only thing that we have to do, but it's the thing that has the biggest impact on Washingtonians across this state. And if you look at the Washington recovery budget that we passed in 2021, and then our supplemental budget last year, those were really the things that helped our working families and our communities and our small businesses weather the pandemic storm. So I think that's certainly the most important thing that we can do. I also think along with that, our capital budget is the other one, in large part because housing is such an important issue to us in this state, and we can talk more about why that is. So I think that those 2 are probably the most important. There are going to be a lot of other big bills, but for constitutional and other reasons. I think the things that I predict that I have not yet seen the bill that should not reach the light of day, the most significant one. But I would just say as a general rule, things that take us backward on bodily autonomy for everyone in this room, including a woman's right to choose, including trans, rights for trans people, things like that. We are not, and I think November told us that Washington isn't really interested in going backward. They're interested in going forward. So I think that's how we'll look at things, or I do.
Thank you. Representative Wilcox.
Well, thank you, Drew. I think Lori's absolutely right that those are the bills that have to pass. I'm going to pick some policy bills and concede those. First, after years of frustration, I think we've got a good opportunity to have a bipartisan, broad, and effective middle housing bill. And I'm looking forward to that this time. We've got sincere people on both sides working hard on that. And I hope it goes early because it'll be a lot easier to pass early than it will late after we all get bitter about the things that we don't like. Next, I think a fix to the Blake decision that recognizes that law enforcement and criminal justice shouldn't be the first choice when it comes to addressing the tragedy that so many families see in addiction and all the consequences of that, but also recognizes that for many it can be part of a better solution. And I bet most families in Washington have seen that happen as well. One that is a little more obscure, but I hope it doesn't pass because I think it takes us backwards and creates an awful lot of bitterness, is a rent control bill and a rent control debate that demonizes the people that are trying to provide housing.
Thank you. Senator Dingray.
Thank you. So Speaker Jenkins has been in the legislature longer than I have, so I think she remembers those sessions that they went into special session and couldn't pass a budget. Since I've been in the legislature, we've passed a balanced budget on time every single time. So I too am going to pick policy bills because I'm just going to assume we're going to pass a balanced budget like we have for the last 5 years on time. I think absolutely the Blake decision. This was a Supreme Court decision that came during the middle of session, which found our drug possession law unconstitutional. And so there was a fix that was put in because we had to do it in a short period of time. That fix expires this year. And so we definitely will be making sure that we are trying to manage what we can with the Blake decision, trying to be as much data-driven and evidence-based as possible. That may not be possible, but we will come up with a solution. The second policy issue that I think we absolutely must pass is taking a look at our special needs kids, and I'm going to add youth mental health to that bucket. It is really critical that we address those issues so that our children are successful. And in the Senate, we already have 2 bills that set limitations on a woman's right to choose an abortion, and those bills will not get a hearing. Thank you.
Senator Braun.
Well, thank you, Drew. I'm last, so this is easy for me. I get to largely agree with my 3 colleagues. Certainly, we're going to pass budgets. I think there's no question about that. When it comes to policy bills, I agree with the previous speakers that Blake is probably the top issue. I don't think we necessarily agree on the contents of that bill. I think we need a bill that involves that it provides services, is compassionate. We look at folks to get them off addiction, but also involves law enforcement, because the fact is that they can't be separated from this issue. That they are connected to this issue every day on the streets of Washington. We are losing this fight in a bad way, and people are dying as a result of the policies we have in place right now. We need to take a compassionate but more firmer stance to get folks into treatment, keep them in treatment, and get them back to a life that is productive and that's going to take a down the road approach to get that done, down the middle approach to get that done. So I think that's going to be a bill that gets passed. I think there's a lot of ups and downs before we get to that final landing spot, but that's a bill I would highlight. The other one I would highlight doesn't exist yet, but I think it will exist, and that's a bill that gets after the learning loss our students have suffered over the last 3 years. We could go back and debate, whether we keep kids in school, take them out of school. We had that debate But none of that's going to help right now. Right now, we all need to focus on what do we do to get them back on track. And we are certainly not doing enough in our school system. There should be no question about that. 1 in 3 of our children are well below grade level, and we are cutting them short, both now and in the future. We're also shorting our state in the future. These are kids that are going to grow into young adults and be part of our community, part of our workforce, and they are currently not prepared. We have to do something meaningful about that. I think that's going to take shape hopefully over the next few weeks into something that we can all get around and support, give our school districts the tools and the funding they need to get after this in a quick and responsive way. I'm hopeful that'll include things like intensive tutoring, like summer school, perhaps even use this opportunity to think about how do we restructure our school year so that we don't have not just the learning loss from the pandemic, but the ongoing learning loss we suffer every year as a result of the break in the summer. So those are the things I think we should get done, we need to get done. I think the one thing we shouldn't see the light of day is actually the wrong Blake decision, a Blake decision that legalizes hard drugs, that decriminalizes hard drugs, that tries to take us down a path that we know from our experiment over the last 2 years and the experiment we saw in Oregon is not only harmful to our state, it costs people lives. We have to, I'm going to double down on the Blake decision. We have to not just pass on it, we have to pass the right thing. Because if we pass the wrong thing, we will continue to see these large increases in overdose deaths. I mean, right now, if you're under 60, the second leading cause of death is overdose in our state. The growth rate in overdoses in our state is over 2 times the national average. We're on the wrong track here. And if we continue to get it wrong, more people will die. We can't let that happen.
Thank you all. You've covered quite a few topics there, but that's good. We'll get to many more. Angela.
Yes, and it seems like Blake and the budget, 2 of the big ones, although we did hear an array of issues that you would like to see addressed. But let's start with the budget, your mandate, what is required of this legislative session. Representative or Speaker Jenkins, I'd like to start with you. The governor's budget plan calls for spending $70 billion over the next 2 years. That's roughly a 12% increase in spending over the current year. What about the proposal hits the mark or is way out in left field?
Angela, first I just want to say a little bit of a fangirl thing here. Like, I'm used to hearing you on the radio, but I've never met you in person, and I'm like, that's Angela King. So that's kind of, anyway, I get to see Drew in person, right? So I know
Yes.
he lives.
I do have a face, but it's for radio nowadays. But please,
Well, so I have not spent a lot of time on the governor's budget. And this is kind of an aside, but when I worked in the executive branch for many, many years, and when I would have folks call me about a budget item that they were working on and wanted advice about, I would say, listen, the governor's budget is like you're 80% there if you get in the governor's budget. Just focus on getting in the governor's budget, you're 80% there. And then I got elected to the legislature and people would call me and they would say, we're in the governor's budget. And I would say, that means nothing. So it really is a matter of perspective. I think here's the thing about the governor's budget. And again, I'm not going to give a specific answer because I really haven't studied it. And that does kind of say a little bit about how the legislature thinks of it. It's a starting point, and we usually do the way I think both the House and Senate budgets is we do puts and takes from the governor's budget, and then we do different things. I do think that this affects both the capital budget and the operating budget, but I do think his proposal on a bonding for housing is really, I don't know if it'll end up in the budgets. I don't know if we'll pass it. The bill requires a referendum, but I do think, considering where we're at with housing right now, it is aggressive and it is worth consideration. So I think that's something that I guess I would say intrigued by.
Okay, all right. We're going to bookend it here, and Senator Braun, I'd like to pose this question to you. As you mentioned, the pandemic education concerns, but specifically, we know the pandemic created all kinds of uncertainty, and the response ushered in the CARES Act and the issuance of COVID relief money. Now, on top of all of that, we've got the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some would say this is unprecedented. This is a once-in-a-generation moment. And add to that, starting this year, approximately 420,000 Washingtonians will get a rebate from anywhere between $300 to $1,200 under the bipartisan Working Families Tax Credit. Outside of that, though, what kind of appetite do you think the legislature will have this session for middle-class tax breaks, or are concerns about a still shaky economy leading to thoughts of banking this money in other ways as they relate to their specific deadlines?
Hey, well, I'm an optimist. You can't be in this business without being optimistic. But and I know for certain that there's a lot of appetite in my caucus. I suspect there's appetite in Representative Wilcox's caucus. What I heard in the last few days, we've all been on many of these panels, we've heard from the governor yesterday that there's not much appetite. Unfortunately, what we see, and this is the frustrating thing about the budget in the earlier question, is we see a budget that grows again by a significant rate, almost twice the rate of personal income in our state. That it spends on new programs while not fully supporting existing programs. Think about K-12. I mentioned earlier, we were at 51% of the budget. K-12 was 51% of the budget only a few years ago when we wrapped up the McCleary lawsuit. We're now down at 43% of the budget in the governor's proposal. We are underfunding K-12, and we're putting money into new programs, and we're spending unsustainably on new programs, and then we're claiming, oh, well, we just don't have money to provide tax relief for average Washingtonians. And so I can tell you, I want to be optimistic. I know that my caucus and Republicans are very interested in finding tax reliefs that helps Washingtonians more broadly. We did support the family tax credit. I think that's a positive step forward. I think that's a meaningful tax relief for a certain segment of the population, but it doesn't cut more broadly. I think anything from a relief on gas taxes, even if temporary, to a sales tax reduction, or something that would help broadly Washingtonians around the state, that would be good. But I think that we're going to have a challenge getting that through under the current majorities.
Thank you. Next question. The governor's budget doesn't have any proposed or new proposed tax increases. Instead, it relies in part on the controversial capital gains tax that was approved in the 2021 legislature. But since then, it's come under legal scrutiny, as we all know, and is currently being challenged in court. So is it wise, Senator Dinkra, how should I say this? Is it a good idea to bank on something that is still in legal limbo and to rely on that funding as part of the budget plan?
So I'll say it's not, and that's what the legislature has done. The budgets that we have passed in the last few years do not bank on those dollars. And I'll just say in the last few years, Washington has earned a AAA bond rating. And they have earned that rating because of fiscal responsibility, of making sure that we have a rainy day fund, making sure that we are spending wisely. And so I think unless, I am a lawyer and you can predict what the Supreme Court's going to do, but you really don't know. So I think you can know it's out there, but I don't think you can rely on it until you have it.
Thank you. All right, Representative Wilcox, this is for you. Governor Inslee is proposing the state raise $4 billion by issuing bonds outside of the state's debt limit. How much appetite is there for that, especially since it would bust the debt limit? And what about what some would call a lack of a clear funding mechanism or revenue stream for that?
Well, thank you. I think there's an appetite for a discussion. There's broad agreement that we have a housing crisis. I don't know anyone that doesn't believe that. And the legislature has backed on both sides of the aisle and across the rotunda proposals to fund publicly construction of low-income housing. I think we're going to be extremely careful about breaking the debt limit because everybody, including the senator here, values the bond rating that we have and understand that the bond rating has a large impact on our future budget viability as well. Without contesting that there's a place for public funding for the construction of low-income housing, it's important to notice that even at that high rate, it's only addressing a small part of the deficit that we have in terms of housing. And the only way that we're going to catch up is to have a very, very robust construction schedule in the private market. And one of the things that worries me about the governor's proposal is because it seems so large, and because it's not widely known how large the problem actually is in comparison to that solution, that folks will assume that we have this problem solved and will continue to go down the road of creating new costs and new regulations and new roadblocks in the way of public housing construction. And it would not be difficult to imagine a situation where over the time that those public housing units are constructed, we destroy the opportunity to create at least that many private sector housing opportunities through continued overregulation of construction.
Thank you.
Thank you. You guys are covering quite a few topics. We're hoping to get everyone out of here at 9 o'clock, but we want to remind folks, if you have a question, put it down on a card and we will get to those questions in a little bit. Also in a little bit, we'll have a speed round coming up with just kind of some yes and no sort of responses, but we have a few more heavy hitting questions here. Let's talk about public safety. In 2021, legislators passed a law restricting when police can chase after folks. Law enforcement fought this hard, said the crime rate was going to go up, criminals were going to take advantage of it. Law enforcement today says crime has gone up. Nobody's chasing after car thieves anymore, catalytic converter thieves. We've heard those complaints. We've heard the perhaps appetite for adding some more crimes. Right now, you can only chase someone for, correct me if I'm wrong, Senator, DUIs or sexual or violent crimes. So should that law be expanded, and what else might be on the table for public safety this session? Senator Dingro, we'll start with you on that.
Thank you. As the prosecutor in the room, I assume that question was for me. So when we have legislation, the question you always want to ask, what is the problem that this bill is trying to fix? And so when it came to the vehicle pursuit bill, when you ask the question, what is the problem this bill is trying to fix, is the fact that 80% of the individuals that are killed in vehicle pursuits were individuals that had nothing to do with the incident. 80% just happened to be at the wrong time, at the wrong place. And that is what we were trying to fix. And that has been effective. The policy that was put in place is policy that was very similar to what some of the city policies already were. City of Bellevue had a very similar policy. City of Redmond had a very similar policy. I believe even the city of Spokane had a very similar policy. Crime has been on the rise nationally. This is not something that is unique to Washington. And so I've been following this closely, and I've actually asked a few of the officers to kind of do some staffing with me, case staffing, to see where they're at. And I'll tell you two examples that come up, and these examples really talk about how this issue is politicized. I sit on a lot of committees that deal with sexual assault, and one of the detectives, a detective, said, the reason why we can't investigate sexual assault cases is because of the police accountability reforms. I was on Zoom and I said, I'm sorry, in all my years, 18 years of being a prosecutor, I have yet to see a case where a sexual assault predator gets in a car and flees and there's a chase. Have you ever come across a case? And she goes, no, that's not it. And I said, and when is a law enforcement officer concerned about liability for use of force in a sexual assault case? No, that's not the case. That's just an example of how it's politicized and not necessarily based on the rationale of what is actually good policy. I'll give you another example. And this actually happened in Redmond. And there's this case where the cop stops the individual, goes up to him, sees catalytic converters. The guy decides to take off. He calls 911 and tells the 911 dispatcher, tell the cops to stop chasing me. And so this was an example the cops gave me. And I said, and did you not have his license plate? And since he called 911, you had his phone number and geolocation. So I'm guessing you were waiting for him at his house to arrest him. And they're like, yes, we arrested him. So the question really is, you have these narratives, but I want to look at the data. How many of these individuals are actually being caught, whether being caught later that day or the next day? And then ask the question, are they all being charged then with a felony attempting to elude? And yes, they are. So this is where I say, show me the data of how it's related, show me what the problem is, and then let's find a solution that fixes that problem.
Thank you, Senator. I'd like to hear from one of the Republicans on the panel on that. I'll let you guys fight over that. But what do we need to do about public safety, specifically the pursuit bill?
So this may shock you, Drew, but I'm not going to agree with my colleague here. I think she's got it wrong. I mean, and I don't think we're as far apart as folks may suspect, but my belief is that we need to not go back to our law prior to 2021, but we need to provide our law enforcement officers additional flexibility as they make these very difficult decisions on very short notice in situations we are frankly unable to predict at the legislative level. You have to remember at the level of the legislature, we have very, I'd say, kind of crude controls. We have to rely on real people with training, with accountability, making good decisions in the field. It applies across state government, and certainly within law enforcement, where they're put in a position to make decisions on a second's notice. I think a much better approach, and this is an approach that has been well negotiated in the Senate. We actually passed it out of the Senate last year, passed out of the House last year, that make sure the officers get the right training to respond, to decide whether they should pursue or not pursue. It holds them accountable, but it gives them broader latitude to make that decision. See, what's missed in the notion that, hey, we can just, drive directly to their house and pick them up is one, that doesn't happen as often as is suggested. But two, what does that person do between the time they commit the first crime and the time we actually find them at their home? We are putting people in additional jeopardy, and we see it right now. And now, certainly you can make the argument that not all the increase in crime is related to this one's policy. But you can't say it's not related, not when you're faced with feedback from law enforcement officers across our state. And I would disagree pretty strongly with the notion that this is being politicized. And when I talk to law enforcement, when I talk from law enforcement from King County to Lewis County where I live, they're not talking about this in terms of, Republican or Democrat. They're talking about, this is our profession. Our job is to keep our community safe. We want to do it in a responsible and compassionate, respectful way, but we need the tools to do this, and you're not giving us those tools. This is a proposal that has been negotiated, that has passed both chambers, and if there's willingness by the current majority leadership, it would pass again today or in this session at some point. It's the right thing. Understand, when you talk about the very core of this policy that was passed in 2021, it says that officers need probable cause to pursue. We are the only state in the country, I believe, that has that. Everybody else is reasonable suspicion. We are different. You can't say we're the one outlier. We have 25-year highs in crime, in some cases longer than that, and yet it's not the policy we passed. That is just a blind eye to the policy we put in place, and is causing, again, real harm in our communities.
Thank you, Senator. Angela.
All right. Let's talk about the proposed assault weapons ban. And Speaker Jenkins, I'd like to start with you on this one. The governor and the attorney general have unveiled legislative proposals that would ban assault or military-style weapons, and this is not the first time this idea has been presented in the legislature. In fact, a member of the Northwest News Network, OPB specifically, says this ban effort has failed 6 previous times. So, do Democrats have to vote to get it passed? And if so, what would make it different this time that it would pass?
Well, I mean, the assault weapons ban's doing better than Kevin McCarthy, but even under that analysis. But I think it does have a very good chance of passing this year. Our caucus hasn't talked about it explicitly, nor have I vote counted folks. But I think there are always details in this. I'm the former chair of the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee in the House. We heard all the firearm bills there, and have heard this bill there. And I think one of the issues that gets raised, and I'm not an expert, I still am not an expert at this, but is exactly how you define what an assault weapon is. So I think that'll be important for us to clarify. I don't want to kind of horn in on what my Republican colleagues might say about this, but I expect there will be some pretty significant opposition and a lot of amendments requested. So this gets into just kind of a procedural thing on the floor. is the more amendments you have, the more time a bill takes, and that means the more other bills aren't getting passed, so that there starts to be a competitive environment to pass bills. But again, I think both our caucus is supportive, and I looked at the recent Elway Crosscut poll, and it's pretty clear that over the last number of years, there have been a number of gun violence initiatives on the ballot. They always get about somewhere between 56 and 58% of the electorate that support them. And that's what the Elway poll says. Although the more interesting thing about it is that the Elway poll also is showing across the state, Eastern Washington, Western Washington, Northeast, Southwest, in every corner of the state, lots of support for it.
All right, Representative Wilcox, the governor and the AG also want there to be a requirement that people have a permit or license to purchase a gun. There's also a gun maker liability proposal that would make manufacturers potentially liable for negligent sales in the state that would result in the death of a person. So is this part of the cure, so to speak, or what issues do you have with this proposal?
Well, I don't think it's part of the cure. I don't think it's effective. We have a few other things that have happened since proposals were offered in previous years. First of all, we have a magazine size regulation now that I think makes a lot of the other regulatory efforts moot. And it is being challenged in court, of course, along with a lot of similar bans across the country. And it seems much more likely that those things are going to be declared unconstitutional. The first day of the session, we do swear an oath to the laws and Constitution of the state of Washington and the United States. And as you sit in that building longer, I think that oath that you take every 2 years means a little more, and it would be, I think, a little difficult to vote yes on something that seems so likely to be unconstitutional.
All right, I'm gonna hand it back over to Drew so we stay on time and get as many topics covered.
Thank you. Something that came up yesterday, and 3 of the 4 of you yesterday met with members of the Capitol Press Corps, and we also heard from the budget writers. Something that kept coming up, there were some phrases that kept getting thrown around. Laser focus, we heard that all the time, so you don't have to say that again today. But something that I sort of was enlightening was that both sides of the party, both sides of the aisle were talking about the workforce and job vacancies, nursing, teaching, law enforcement. We can go on and on. Ferries, state employees, state agencies. I'd like to get short answers from each of you, and we'll start on the other end. What's one idea that can boost the numbers that is realistic to get past? What can the state do to fill some of these unfilled positions without lowering standards or putting safety at risk? What are some realistic options for filling some of those vacancies that we're all seeing around the state?
Well, I'm going to steal this idea the speaker shared yesterday. We should seriously look at our licensure requirements where they are going beyond the safety requirement and simply becoming protective to the existing folks in those professions. We need to go back and look at what we require to keep our communities safe and not require beyond that. That will open the door for many people who want to get into a whole variety of professions.
Senator Dingren.
I agree. I think we absolutely have to take a look at licensing, credentialing. We as a state do not utilize certified peers in our healthcare system, and I think we really need to have a huge bill that opens that field up so that people can, with lived experiences, can come in and do the work of engagement, which is so critical. We also have to take a look at each profession's job responsibility. Many times there's work that they're doing that actually can be done by someone else. And so really and I wasn't there yesterday, so can I use laser focused?
You weren't allowed
I haven't used that phrase yet.
That's it.
So we need to be laser focused. I'm going to stop. Actually, it's not one that comes natural to me.
Stop your head.
And I'm really making sure that the people who have the certification, the qualifications, are actually doing that job and not necessarily doing a lot of administrative tasks that take them away from their core competencies. So I think this really is an opportunity to take a look at all of that and be very deliberative about who's doing what job.
Representative Wilcox.
Require that all new high school construction include shop facilities and rebuild the vocational training that was actually led by clubs and organizations in high schools, and I'm talking about organizations like FBLA and FFA.
Just so folks know, Drew asked for short answers because I went on a diatribe about this yesterday, and it was hard. It was very hard to stop me, and I kept on going back and back and back to it. But so my one idea, just because others have talked about some of the other things that I agree with, is I think for our law enforcement community, when I talk to the police chiefs in my district, they say that their most significant problem is that they're 25 to 30% understaffed for the funding that they have to staff, so that they could hire more law enforcement officers. They've got the money for it, they just don't have the people. And part of this is that our Criminal Justice Training Commission is really backed up and is not able to provide as many classes. Like, all of their classes are full and there's a backlog. So I think two things here. One, we need to expand the work of the Criminal Justice Training Commission to make sure that we can get well-trained law enforcement officers out into community right away. And I think we would see very different things if our law enforcement community was just fully staffed at the levels that they're currently funded. We would see a lot better work in community safety. Second thing I'd like us to try on that is one of the things that happens is local jurisdictions hire somebody as a law enforcement officer, then they go get trained at the training commission, then they come back to the community. That can take up to 6 months for them to, between the time they kind of get signed on and they can come back in. I think we ought to ask the training commission to start recruiting and training officers and creating a pool of them that local communities could go to and hire directly from a pool of trained officers right away. They wouldn't be required to do that, but that would help us get more officers on the street more quickly for people.
Thank you all.
All right. One topic that came up when we started this whole discussion was bodily autonomy. And an amendment to the Washington State Constitution to protect abortion rights has been pre-filed, and legislators can vote on it during this session. Does it have enough votes to pass at this time? And if not, what next? And I will leave that open to whomever wants to grab that.
I'll just grab it. I'll say no, we don't. This is an issue that we need everyone, regardless of party affiliation, to vote on this, and we simply do not have the numbers in the Senate to pass it.
I have a different perspective. I have 58 votes. We need a 2/3 vote in the House. I have 58 members. I have 58 votes. That's not 2/3. JT, I'm wondering how many votes you have.
Well, I haven't caucused on it, and I've said many times, House Republicans don't have a litmus test, and if it comes to the floor, we'll find that out. But there are some things that I think that we could find a lot of agreement on. You've seen House Republicans in the past work hard on making long-term birth control more available to anyone that needs it without or wants it without barriers of cost. I think you would find 100% agreement between the caucuses in terms of being sure that women that choose to give birth are supported to the greatest extent possible. Those are the things that we can work on now, and I hope that we do those.
Yeah, I just add, because this for some reason isn't clear to the people of the state of Washington, nothing in the as a result of the Dobbs decision changed the law in Washington. The people of the state of Washington made access to abortion legal in 1970. They modified it slightly, again by initiative in 1991. Nothing has changed that law. No one is in a position to change that law. Certainly not. My caucus is not focused on that issue. Even when we were in the majority, we did not pass a single bill on this issue. This is not an issue that is truly under threat. It's been politicized. I understand that. But this isn't an issue that is under threat in the state of Washington. The people of the state of Washington have spoken very clearly on this. No one's trying to change that who is in a position at all to change that. And if you look at yesterday we had a chance to listen to the results of the recent Elway poll. This is not the top issue the people of the state of Washington care about. They care about public safety, they care about affordability, they care about education. This is not a top issue, and because they think they're starting to understand, they have already spoken on this issue. They have been very clear on this issue. No one is threatening on this issue, and they want us to focus on the things that are affecting their daily lives.
I think that I have a different interpretation of that poll, which is people don't think it's that it's lower on the list because they've elected Democrats to control the House and the Senate, and they know that we will work to protect a woman's right to choose, and we'll do other things. I mean, whether or not we're able to do the constitutional amendment, there are many, many other things that we would do, but to say that it's not under threat, I just think is not correct. That's what people thought, that Roe v. Wade would be here forever, and look at what happened. In one fell swoop, it's gone. And we have women all over this country who are now starting to come to Washington State. Washington State, a state that has been a shining light in so many ways for so many people in this country, and we will continue to be that. But we are going to have to continue to protect women from Idaho and all over the country to be able to keep their ability to have bodily autonomy, to make those choices. Anyway, I'm obviously kind of hot on this topic, but I don't think it's fair to say there is no threat. There is a threat every day, and we saw that threat this last year come to fruition, and we're not going to let it happen in Washington.
And I'll just add, you can have great laws on the books, but it's about access. And I guarantee you that every woman or person who wants an abortion in the state of Washington does not have access to that service. We have to make sure that access to that service is what is provided, because if the law says you can have it, but there's no one providing that service, it is meaningless. And so we have to continue to make sure that gender-affirming care, abortion rights are protected and available in the state of Washington.
And before we move on, Senator Braun.
Apparently, we're allowed to break in there. That's awesome. I wish I'd known that earlier. If we want to talk about access, let's talk about access. Nothing about a constitutional amendment changes access. Nothing. There is. I'll go back to, it's been a while now, but the Senate had a Republican majority for 5 years. We didn't pass a single abortion bill because, as J.T. Wilcox mentioned earlier, we don't have a litmus test in the Republican Party. And you've seen that nationally. You look at the vote in Kansas, where a large percentage of Republicans voted for that initiative. This is not an issue that Republicans, there are Republicans that care deeply about this issue, but it is not a make or break issue. And we are not in the business of changing the decision made by the people of the state of Washington. And nothing about that affects access. So we want to work on access, let's work on access. But a constitutional amendment doesn't fix that problem.
All right, Senator Braun, thank you for rolling with us. We're trying to have a conversation, so I appreciate your willingness to respond and for the conversation to develop. Go ahead.
Is it getting hot in here, or is that just me? I think we have maybe time for one more question before we get to our speed round, and we'll see how the timing works out, but I definitely want to get to the audience as well. Let's try to keep these answers quick as well, if you can. We talked about learning loss, or we heard that come up. An audit came out this week saying especially low-income schools, communities of color suffered even more learning loss than other communities. What can the state do about that? I know some bills were passed last year, but it's still an issue, and it's going to be an issue. What can you tell parents the state can do about fixing that? We'll start here, Speaker Jenkins.
K-12 education is not my biggest expertise area, but I think a couple of things. I do want to go back to workforce. We've got to have teachers in classrooms, para-educators to be helping students. And with those shortages, that doesn't help our kids recover from the learning loss of the pandemic. I think the other thing is it's really important for us to be making long-term commitments there, because the pandemic, young people experience that over, almost 3 years. It's important that we make a long-term commitment to building and measuring and making sure that we're growing, that our young people are growing. The other thing that I'm highly concerned about is the mental health status of our young people. And again, another workforce issue. While we have funded school counselors and nurses, every school can hire them. They don't exist to be hired right now. So those are workforce challenges that we need to do to help our young people be successful. So that kind of generally, I think that's how I'm oriented.
Representative Wilcox.
Well, some of you know I'm married to a teacher who taught junior high math during the pandemic and then retired, not because it was such a terrible experience, but she just wanted to retire. And one of the tragedies is that there certainly were kids that were able to be successful under that scenario. There were many who just simply quit attending. And we know the statistic about learning loss, and we also know some statistics about pretty major drops in enrollment that are uneven across the state. And I think this portion of our young people that have just decided not to participate in schools is another crisis. And I think one way that we need to address this, especially among the groups that you mentioned, lower income and communities of color, is to provide more flexible choices when it comes to education. About 7 or 8 years ago, we kind of stalled out in offering charter schools. And I believe this is the time. The system is already broken, and it's time to expand choices for people, especially among those that don't have the resources to just choose a private school that is already existing.
Senator Dingler.
So I agree with Senator Braun on this, where I really do think, I'll tell you, parents in my district, Redmond, Sammamish, Kirkland, their kids go to after school activities. They go to math club and chess club and robotics, and they do coding. These are opportunities that are not available to all children. And we have to make sure that we are providing access to so much of this that all children need. And I definitely do think that there is, even prior to the pandemic, we had the summer learning loss. That was a real thing in our state. And we have to take this opportunity to address that as well.
Senator Braun.
Yeah, apparently. So there's a couple things I mentioned: 2 short-term and 1 long-term fix. 2 short-term intensive tutoring. This is a path that's been verified by research across the country, where you use, sometimes older children tutor younger children across the education spectrum. It's not very expensive. It's very effective, and we could invest even a small amount of money in this and help our students considerably. And that's again broader, providing the funding and the tools for our school districts. The other is summer school. If take away the pandemic, if you have a child that is falling behind, it's not unheard of to use summer school as a way to catch up. We could certainly use that more broadly. And as I said earlier, I think that would be a launching board to talk about how we currently structure our school year and really think about year-round schooling, whether it's 200 days spread more broadly, or if it's more or 180 days rather spread more broadly, or it's 200 days or 220 days. I think there's a lot of things we can do, not just to correct the learning loss we're seeing right now, but also get after long-term learning loss and improve our kids' success. We have to be really clear where we stand. 10 years ago, our public school system was a top 10 in the country. Now we are average, and we're falling. We should be honest with ourselves about that. We are going in the wrong direction, and we need some short-term things to get us back on track. Long-term, as I have mentioned before, we need to look at funding. We are on the wrong track on funding our public education system. It is declining as a percentage of revenue in the overall operating budget. It is also declining. Not many folks realize this, but we actually cut K-12 public education funding. The budget passed by the majorities last year cut K-12 education funding from the underlying budget passed in 2021 to the supplemental. Not an Olympia cut where we just didn't grow as fast, actually less money. We can't let that happen. And some of that's driven by the prototypical school model, how we fund schools, because we had less kids, but we had lots of opportunity to reinvest that money in education that would have made the difference. We need to do that, and we need to keep our eye on the ball when it comes to long-term state funding for basic education. The last thing I'd say is when we debated this in 2021 about getting kids back in school, we talked about, I talked about this is the equity issue of our time, and I believe it really is. The kids that were already doing well, that had a good support system, they're making it through this all right. But kids who were in 2020 already struggling academically already struggling emotionally, socially, financially. These are the kids that got hurt the worst and are still hurt the worst. We are leaving these kids behind, and we can't let that happen.
Thank you all. Should we go to the speed round?
Do we want to take any audience questions? Are there any questions out there? And if so, we have microphones set up toward the second pillar. So maybe we can get through 3 or 4. So if you want to go ahead and just head toward the mic, we will do that. To our representatives and senators, thank you very much for being open and frank. And it's good to see that there is some robust debate as well as some consensus among this panel. So
And don't
let's
hold
hear
back.
from the audience.
We've got time for you. So if you are afraid, don't be afraid. Come on up and speak your piece.
And please say your name as you pose your question.
I'm sure. Good morning. My name is Mikkelsen Jackson Rowland. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming this morning. I have kind of a controversial question, but it is something that does keep me up at night, and that is housing costs. In Canada, they recently made laws that foreign nationals can no longer purchase property because that was one of the factors that was driving up the price. I know from my own home purchase, and when I was going through the process, you know, I lived in Madison Park, renting at the time. I was trying to buy a house. Every house was being purchased by a foreign national. Is there any chance that someone in Olympia will come up with some kind of legislation to protect us who are, you know, struggling and working and trying to buy homes, and there's houses sitting empty with prices going up by foreign nationals who come in and pay cash?
I don't think any of us have been exposed to that problem. I think we're all, you've heard us speak earlier, I think we're all committed to addressing the housing issue. I mean, I'd say often have some of the similar ideas, some different ideas, but that's an idea I had not heard as a concern. I'm certainly not opposed to addressing it, but I think you're gonna have to rely on what the majorities want to put on the table.
So I'll say, you know, on the east side, this has been brought up. And I think we have to see what happens in Vancouver and what it shows. So housing is an area where really we have to take a look at all ideas to see where we can make the most impact. So I know I, along with others, are watching, and I think we have to see what happens there and if that is something that makes a difference or whether it's a solution that actually does not have any impact. So I'm sure more on that later.
Good question.
Good morning and thank you. We've all read about the rise in hate crimes nationally and within our state. A topic that I haven't heard this morning: should Washington have a hate crimes hotline similar to Oregon, where victims of hate crimes can access wraparound professional services through a hotline? Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. Call my office. Let's propose a bill.
I would say we do have a task force that's staffed by the AG's office that brings forward recommendations every session on what we should do to improve the enforcement of our hate crimes laws, because we've been pretty aggressive in Washington in terms of our laws in that. So that's another place to go talk to them, because we do pay a lot of attention to what they recommend, and I'm sure they'd be happy to weigh in on that kind of an idea.
And I'll just add that is something that has been brought up over the years because not everyone recognizes the full impact of a hate crime or what it encompasses. They think you have to be physically injured in some way, and they don't realize that. And you know, I hear stories upon stories. Actually, after 9/11, when the Sikh community, the Muslim community started being subjected to so much hate crime, and really making that understanding that it's not just violence. It has to be much more than that. And a hotline is something that has been discussed previously, and I think there's a lot of interest in doing something like that, just even to create that awareness of what happens when you're called racial slurs, when you're followed and dealt with in very aggressive ways because of your race. A lot of that behavior does not get reported because people don't know that they can report it. And a hotline is one way of making sure people feel comfortable talking about it and reporting it so we can actually track data around it.
Hello, my name is Jamie. I heard you talk a lot about kids who aren't getting the education they need because of COVID, police officers. We have the training money in the criminal space to go and train them. I'm wondering about mandatory public service in order to graduate from high school or college. It seems that that would solve two problems. You'd be sort of retrofitting the problems that we have while also engaging kids who may not be as engaged in something that they can pursue after high school. Maybe they don't have to go to college. Maybe they become a healthcare worker or a police officer, and they've almost had that associate's degree, if you will, or running start mentality. So that's an idea.
Well, I've been involved in a mentoring program in the past with the Yum High School where they attempted something like that, and I'm not sure if they are still doing it. And I think that there's some pretty important aspects of that. It's also subject to some misuse. I think we have a related problem, and that is that we've got some fairly major demographic groups that aren't aware of the opportunities for training that are out there, and sometimes it's demographic groups like our Hispanic workforce, which is the one growing part of our workforce, and I think is far less aware of opportunities. Other times it's geographically based. There's not that many opportunities in the most rural areas of the state of Washington. And a step in the direction that you're talking about, I think, would be to be very sure that all of the agencies, whether they're public or private, that are offering job training and service opportunities are required to reach out much more broadly than they already are, and are not allowed simply to be appealing to what the workforce of the 80s and 90s looked like.
I'll just add that our schools have been doing a lot more with apprenticeship, vocational training, just really focusing a lot on how we can get kids interested in other professional opportunities. I know there are some schools who already require 20 hours of community service, something like that, in order to graduate, but it's definitely at the local level. The one thing that many times gets forgotten are we actually do have kids who have jobs after school, and they have limited ability after schools to actually do community service because of their jobs, or they're actually caretakers for their siblings. And so while I think it's a great idea, I think it's very important to think about how you can kind of incorporate that into the school curriculum or provide those opportunities at the school instead of requiring them to occur after school, because there are some real logistical issues, especially if transportation is needed on that. But I agree with you. I think the more we can engage our youth and show them what opportunities exist, the better we all are.
Hi, I'm Jenna Edlin from Seattle here, a 20-year resident, and I just have a question for everybody on the panel. Are you for COVID vaccine mandates? And what are your plans to hire back the roughly 2,000 people that have been fired because of those?
I'm sorry, what did you say this before vaccine mandates?
Are you for COVID vaccine mandates?
Well, I work in public health in my other career. I think at the time that that they were required, they were very appropriate. We'll have to see if that happens again, but I don't have a problem with vaccine mandates when we're saving people's lives from transmission. So I think our vaccine mandates that we've had on so many vaccines in the United States have saved millions and millions of lives. They're probably the most important public health thing that we've ever done. So yes, I am supportive, not immediately at every. It's really about the circumstances of how transmission is occurring. So yes, I'm a public health person to the core, and I believe vaccines work and should be required at times.
No, I'm not in favor of those. I talked with the governor a few weeks before he imposed his mandate. I'm in favor of vaccinating, and I've been very open in telling people that. I talked to the governor about the fact that the workplace was the best way to access people that are hard to reach when it comes to vaccinations. But it works best if you make it voluntary. I think that the mandates actually created resistance that didn't have to exist. It's true that a number of people don't like being forced to do something that they felt like should have been their choice. And there are bills that have been introduced in the legislature that would roll back the state mandate and require that those people be rehired.
So I'll just say I was born in India. Let me tell you, vaccine saves lives. We were just talking about precision medicine and what it can do for cancer. We have to make sure we're utilizing the best science that's out there to make sure people are healthy and safe and alive.
I am opposed to the mandates and have been from the beginning. I served for 30 years in the military. I'm vaccinated for just about everything. I'm vaccinated for COVID. I believe in vaccines, but I also believe in choice. I also think it's ironic when we have this discussion about choice in this context versus the one we discussed earlier. We seem to take opposite positions. But this is, in this case, it is more and more apparent as things develop. We just saw at the federal level, Congress and the president remove the mandate for our military. I think this makes sense. Knowing what we know now, we should move forward and eliminate the mandate at the state level and hire those folks back.
I'd like to add something else too. I'm very aware of employers who have achieved vaccination rates over the 90s among their workforce without a mandate. And they did that by providing easy opportunities to be vaccinated and providing information that is in languages appropriate to their work staff and not creating resistance by telling people that they didn't have a choice.
One of the things I think that is exciting about the way Washington has handled the pandemic, the Commonwealth Fund recently ranked us as the fourth best state in the nation in terms of handling the pandemic. There's data out there that says that many of the things that we did that were done here in Washington have saved somewhere between 17 and 25,000 lives in Washington State. And so we have a lot of people in our communities who are alive now because of the way we handled the pandemic. It doesn't mean that the way we handled it wasn't really hard on people. It was, and it still is. But if we count much of what we did in terms of lives saved, we were highly, highly successful.
Next. One last question, yes.
Alrighty. My name is Sarah Hill. I'm the development coordinator for Seattle City Club. Before I begin, on behalf of all of you, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to combine two of our online questions into one. So is there anything from last session that failed that will be reworked and brought back to this session? Potentially, another person asked about any changes to the Growth Management Act to include climate change impacts.
Well, I think that those two questions might be related to one another. Davina Dewar had a bill last year about incorporating climate change into local government's comprehensive planning. Didn't make it through the legislature in kind of timing of the end of session last year. And so I think that she has worked a lot with stakeholders and is bringing that back this year in some different sorts of forms. I do think that we will see, this is more related to housing, but upzoning to make sure the Growth Management Act works better. And I think our biggest work on climate change is going to be the investments of and the way that the low carbon fuel standard operates and the investments in the Climate Commitment Act. So those are going to be a lot, that's not going to be legislation this year. That's going to be a lot. You'll see that borne out in budgets.
Well, I think it's a very positive thing that after many years of the GMA being written on slabs of marble that couldn't be changed, there's openness to talking about modifying it. Some folks want to modify it in the way that you suggested. Many others want to modify it to make it easier to build infrastructure and especially to build housing, because the rigidity built into GMA is in part responsible for the housing crisis that is causing so much misery in our communities now. And so any discussion that allows common sense changes to GMA is positive. And that's been, in my mind, one of the major changes that's happened over the 12 years I've been in the legislature.
So I'll take the first part of that question was about reintroducing of bills. The majority of bills don't pass in the session that they are introduced in. So yes, absolutely. We see those bills reintroduced. Many times they come in different format. Many times they've been worked more, and sometimes they're in the same format and people just hope it passes again or passes the next time. So there's a lot of things that are familiar and then a lot of things that actually have been improved by stakeholdering work that happens year after year.
Yeah, I think Senator Dinger is right. There's lots of stuff that's going to come back. It'll be in slightly different form, but I hope we see efforts that were last year from how we fund our schools, I mentioned earlier, to get us back on a better long-term track, to how we address things like the Blake decision or the pursuit bill we talked about earlier. These are all things that didn't make it all the way last year after proposals, and I am hopeful that we'll get all the way and solve these in a reasonable and responsible way in this session.
Thank you. And thank you for your questions, both online and here in the building. We have so many more questions for all of you, from climate to Blake. I mean, the list is long. Your work is daunting. You have a lot to address this session. But before we get ready to close it out, we had the lightning round
We
question
got to get
too.
to speed round.
You want to get to speed round real quick? Okay.
This is
all
fun.
right.
If you have
all
to
right.
leave, it is almost 9 o'clock, so we won't object. But we have cards here, and green means yes. Red means no, and yellow means waffle.
Ouch, Drew, that's not very civil discoursey
Sorry.
of you. You might
Yellow
say
means
it's
caution.
complicated. It's complicated.
That's what it is. Okay. Okay.
Choose
Reasonable.
how you want to use the yellow card.
I
but-
know some people that think it means go like hell, but
Well, yeah, speed up, right? So bear with us. We'll make this work. These hold your comments to the end, but do raise your card. And Angela, do you want to start? Do you have that list there?
I sure do. Let's start with number 1. Will you have an electric car by the year 2035?
Personally?
I drove here in one.
Across the board.
Great.
Now, how are you going to get home? Though is the question. That's why I drove my gas guzzler. I have a Leaf, but I can't come from Olympia and get back the same day. That's another topic. Sorry, I was told to keep our comments off.
Oh, and there you go,
Go ahead.
Drew. Okay.
here's your red card.
Yes, exactly.
Flag 'em. Next one, should the legislature continue to allow remote testimony in all hearings? Green.
We have all this agreement. Hot topic here. Should cursive be taught in schools?
Ooh.
Really?
Oh,
What the heck?
There we go.
3 to 4. That's an issue. Angela, do you
It
want
is.
to tell your story about that?
oh yes. Real quick, my granddaughter saw me writing. She saw me. I wrote something. She says, "That's ancient writing." Way to date me, granddaughter.
I
All
show
right.
my ancientness, but I just worry that my son can't sign a check. Now, I guess he doesn't think
Checks,
he'll ever
though,
have
are
a
they
check.
really
Yeah, you don't
relevant?
have
It's
checks.
true.
Okay, I'll handle the next one. Representative Tara Simmons has proposed paying state inmates minimum wage for all the work they do behind bars. Would you support paying state inmates who currently make about 50 cents an hour on average? Should they get the state's minimum wage? There's some. What did you call it?
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
complicated.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Should fentanyl possession be a felony?
I'm sorry, what?
Fentanyl possession be a felony?
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
It's
Interesting.
prescribed by doctors sometimes, so it
True,
depends.
and thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that, Senator. Let's see here. The State Salary Commission has proposed giving state legislators a 4% pay raise next year. Do you deserve a raise?
Yes.
It's complicated.
We have the full spectrum, baby.
These are getting good. These are getting good. All right. I'll jump in here. Let's see, we've already covered that one. The Washington Transportation Commission is going to recommend that the state start transitioning towards a pay-by-mile system. The gas tax isn't working like it used to. Do you support a pay-by-mile system eventually replacing the gas tax? Oh, boy. All right.
And
Transportation Commission's not going to like the looks of those. How about this one? Should the drunk driving threshold currently at 0.08 be lowered to 0.05? Oh my.
Okay, consensus.
Across the board, all right.
Hearing
And I know
in the
you like
second
this-
week of session.
Pardon?
Sorry.
The hearing will be on the second week of session.
Okay, I write my calendar in here. Okay. Is this the year this is a hard hitting one. Is this the year we finally get a state dinosaur? Ah,
Oh.
it's very complicated for Senator Dingell. Okay, it got close. That's one that I would have liked to have seen. Anyway, are we ready for the last question?
Actually, maybe should we just have our closing statements or?
Oh, we got to get. There's one question.
One question.
Will the Seahawks make the playoffs?
Oh, that one. Yeah, well, I'll let you. Oh.
It is complicated. for
That
sure.
one's complicated.
Okay, that's it for the speed round. No more fun questions.
All right, and closing remarks, very quickly, 30 seconds to a minute if you can keep it short. Thank you. We'll start with you, Speaker Jenkins, please.
Well, thanks, Drew and Angela, and thanks to the City Club for hosting this. I just would say that City Club in Tacoma was the first civic organization I ever joined when I moved to Tacoma 35 years ago, so I love city clubs. I talked a lot about the budgets that we did during the pandemic, and I think we really want to build on those this year. You know, our state's doing better than most. We were ranked as having the best economy in the nation last year, but the people in this state, I think, have said they want us to work on things like housing, like workforce, like behavioral health issues and education, community safety, and protecting a woman's right to choose. So I think those will be the things that we work on this year. I think we want to work on those in a bipartisan way. So we're very open to bipartisan ideas on these. The one other note that I want to make is that we very much want to find common ground and advance everybody in Washington State. My caucus is the most diverse it's ever been in history, and I think that helps us create better solutions for every community and every person in the state. So I'm very excited about having broadening voices at the table so that we can really make sure that no one is left behind.
Well, I very much appreciate hearing the mission statement of the City Club of Seattle earlier. The talk about civil discourse is exactly what we need. The last thing we need is a lot more fighting and a lot more people that are getting their positions from either Karl Marx or Adam Smith. Most of these problems are not ideological. And one thing that I feel very strongly about is the minority has a role in politics. And honestly, it's somewhat similar to the best role that the press can fulfill. It is to present alternatives, but at the same time, it is to present them in such a way that the majority understands when they're making a mistake, and we can prevent mistakes that will affect the people of Washington. And what I very much hope we see is a session where we're in person, we have relationships again, and our first priority is to work on the policies where we have the most in common. We know that we're going to have fights. We know that we all have our ideology, and you're going to hear about it on the floor and on the talk shows. But let's concentrate first on the things that we have in common, and then we can have the fights.
So the last 5 years, I have found myself saying, thank God I live in Washington so many times, especially in the last 3 years. And I'm very proud of the work we do in Washington in terms of taking care of people. And I see us continuing to do that. And to me, what we don't talk enough about is the fact that over 95% of our bills are bipartisan. And that's great. That's the way it should be. It should be about finding real solutions to real problems, regardless of where those ideas come from. That is what works. That is what enables Washington and Washingtonians to be successful. So I anticipate that occurring again. Hopefully we can get that number to 98%. But that's a way for us to move forward, and I'm looking forward to next session.
All right, well, thank you for having us here today. I really appreciate it. I think that we need to stay focused on what I believe are the top issues for just the average Washingtonian: public safety, affordability, education. And these are issues we've worked on for a long time, but we really must do better. You know, when you look at Washington, we have, dying homeownership. We're in the bottom 10 in the country. We have, I mentioned earlier, overdoses are the second leading cause of death for anyone under 60. Our homelessness rate has grown at 20 times the national average. In our education system, we have 1 in 3 children who aren't testing at grade level, and we've gone from being a top 10 in this country to an average. We're working on these things, but as I said, we must do better, and we do better when we work together.
Thank you all, and please help us thank our representatives and senators and Speaker for their involvement in this event. Thank you so much.
I learned something. I hope you learned something. I'm going to keep bugging these folks for more of these questions and answers. You can watch our coverage on King 5 and listen to it on KUOW as well.
94.9 FM.
There you go. We'll give it back to Alicia. Thank you for having us. It was
Thank
great.
you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You're almost done. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet.
Oh, you're gonna validate our parking now.
Yeah, I gotta validate. Yeah, you can't leave until I validate your parking. Thank you again so much, everyone, for tuning in, for being here. And I'm going to do something that is typical of me, but you might not know this yet. I'm going to go off script. I had closing statements. Definitely, let's give a round of applause to Drew and to Angela for doing such a great job. You know, I just want to get back to that sense of civil discourse and civic engagement, and being able to see that so many people online were submitting questions, which is great. And so many of you were lined up to ask questions as well. And one person wanted to make a statement, but we ran out of time. And if you did have a question that you still wanted us to present to our panel for later, please submit that to my staff and we'll make sure it gets to them. But this one statement I want to read right now. And thank you for allowing me to read it in your stead. Because part of civic engagement and civil discourse also includes our youth. And one of CityClub's priorities going forward is to make sure that the youth voice is being centered in all of these topics that we talk about. So Tiara Haddon, did I say your name right? I'm going to read what she wanted to say. And I am going to politely challenge our panelists to engage with her after I read this statement. It's about gun violence. I am Tiara Haddon, a junior at Lincoln High School. I was 7 years old when Sandy Hook happened. Active shooter drills have been a part of my life since I was in elementary school. Please pass the assault weapons ban because saying it may, underlined, be unconstitutional is unacceptable. I don't want to be shot at school. I'm sure Tiara is not the only person that has that thought. So with that, I want to say thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this, I hope that you will join us here next month again at the Collective for our Civic Cocktail Series on February the 1st, which is a Wednesday evening. Find us online at seattlecityclub.org or just Google. But either way, have a wonderful day, have a wonderful weekend, and Happy New Year.